of the middle class and the emerging markets macro environment. Now, by 2020, China's middle class is expected to grow from about 350 million people to 600 million. Other emerging markets are following suit, but as economic growth begins to slow, Beijing's leadership is keen to get the middle class spending its newfound wealth. Well, here to discuss the challenges and the opportunities this consumer class will bring are Helen Wang. She's author of The Chinese Dream, The Rise of the World's Largest Middle Class and What It Means to You. Professor Xiao Geng, Vice President of Research at the FUNG Global Institute, and Jeff Walters, Partner and Managing Director of the Boston Consulting Group. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Good to have you on the show. Let's start with you, Helen. And this term, middle class, it can be a pretty broad term. How would you identify it?
Well, I define the Chinese middle class as those with an annual income between 10,000 to 60,000 US dollars. And I also take into consideration for Chinese middle class, they mostly live in the large cities and have a relatively stable job and college graduated.
Professor Xiao, can you see at this stage, as you gaze out for the next 10, 15, 20 years, anything that can really knock this sort of scenario off course, or is it now locked in that this sort of rise of the middle class will happen?
Well, I think from the global market trend perspective, nothing you can actually stop it. But if you look at around the nation states, politics and regulations, they trying to diverging. The market is actually, look at the major cities. They are converging because of the market forces. The lifestyles, the work habits. All those are converging, and that will create more and more middle-income, cities. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a few years ago, actually, people are worried China will fall into this middle-income trap, but won't have a large middle class. As a matter of fact, after these few years, we saw actually Chinese middle class is pulling off. They are expanding and they are consuming.
Yeah.
And
it's an interesting point about the Chinese middle class. Are they spending? Do they feel now that they have the security, the social security, the job security, all sorts of security to actually start opening their wallets? Because it hasn't been the case.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. China, in general, their private consumption is only still 35, 36% of GDP, so it's very low. And when I talk to people about 5 years ago, most of them save 25 to 50% of their income,
yes,
for the rainy day. And today, Chinese are still saving average of 30%.
That's right. But what's interesting is that we read a lot about the decline or the slowdown of GDP growth. In fact, if you look at some numbers about private consumption per capita, if you look at disposable income per capita, which is now growing at high single-digit rates, those are similar rates to how it was growing 2010, 2009, 2011, those years when no one was complaining about the growth of the middle class. So I think from a fundamentals perspective, an income growth perspective, there is still we're still generating middle class consumers, we're generating affluent consumers, but we also, it's not just making money, you also have to convince them to spend.
Right.
And we've seen a dip in sentiment actually last year about willingness to spend, about am I willing to open
based
my
on
wallet.
what?
So we survey Chinese consumers every year. Last year, well, to put it in context, Chinese consumers have historically been the most spend-happy of any consumers we have seen anywhere in the world, period.
That is an interesting fact.
Meaning, are you going to spend more this year than last year? Are you going to trade up and spend more in particular categories? More in China, higher percent than we could find anywhere else in the world. That declined a bit last year. Still very high by global standards. And now this year we've actually seen a bit of a resurgence, but not everywhere. Where we've seen it the most is actually the smaller cities. Those cities where cost of living is lower. Those cities where $10,000 goes a bit further than it does in a Shanghai.
So they're feeling more confident about the future. They're feeling confident enough to spend.
Yes.
And Professor, as you look at, as we talk incessantly about GDP numbers, and we are expecting to see those headline numbers continue to dip. As Jeff says, individual spending is still going up, but do you think there will be a knock-on as the GDP growth dips to, say, 6%, that some people are talking about next year? You are going to see that optimism wear off and consumers start to rein in a bit.
The key for purchasing power is actually the wealth. So when you see the GDP is growing like 7%, looks like low, 6%, 5%, but the fact is, the revaluation of the assets, both physical and human, is huge, and that's really the source of purchasing power, and that's just started to happen in China.
Sorry, just explain what you mean by that.
Well, what do I mean is that when your income productivity are increasing, what happens is that the property price is going up.
Right,
because
it's the wealth effect.
The wealth effect, yeah. And when the wealth effect is happening, and then when the market, you can actually sell your property and get the cash, and then you go overseas, you can send your kids to the US, and you can buy all the things with the capital gain from property. That really starts what I call the purchasing power from emerging market.